Just 1 minute ago, a revelation shook the foundations of the royal narrative surrounding Prince Harry, and this time it didn't come from a memoir, a documentary, or a carefully crafted interview. It came from a courtroom. In a moment that stunned both legal experts and royal watchers, private communications allegedly linked to Harry surfaced, conversations that were never meant to be seen by the public. And at the center of this unfolding storm is a familiar name in royal media circles, Charlotte Griffiths. What was said in those messages? Why are they suddenly appearing now? And more importantly, what does this mean for Harry's credibility, his ongoing legal battles, and his already fragile relationship with the royal family? Because here's the twist. This isn't just about leaked texts. It's about narrative control. It's about truth versus perception. And it's about what happens when private words collide with public claims. But what happened next shocked everyone, because behind the scenes, something far bigger was unfolding. And this may be the moment that changes everything for Prince Harry. The story begins inside a courtroom, where Prince Harry has been deeply involved in ongoing legal action tied to media practices and alleged privacy violations. For months, Harry has positioned himself as a central figure in the fight against intrusive journalism. His claims have been consistent. His private life, he says, was repeatedly targeted, manipulated, and exposed without consent. But just as that narrative seemed firmly established, a new development emerged. During recent proceedings, references were made to communications, messages that Harry allegedly exchanged with Charlotte Griffiths, a respected royal editor known for her insights and commentary. At first, it didn't seem unusual. After all, members of the royal family have long had complex, sometimes discreet relationships with members of the press. Background briefings, off-the-record conversations, and strategic leaks have historically played a role in shaping public perception. But this situation felt different, because these weren't vague references or anonymous claims. These were specific exchanges, messages that suggested a level of communication that appeared to contradict Harry's public stance against media collaboration. And that's when things took a dramatic turn. As details began to surface, observers quickly realized that the issue wasn't just about whether Harry spoke to a journalist. It was about what was said, and more importantly, when these alleged conversations reportedly took place during a period when Harry was publicly criticizing the media, accusing it of distortion, intrusion, and ethical violations. So naturally, a question began to form. Was there a disconnect between Harry's public statements and his private actions? However, behind the scenes, something else was unfolding. Legal teams on both sides started to focus not just on the content of the messages, but on their implications. Could these communications weaken Harry's legal position? Could they be used to challenge his claims? And suddenly, what began as a case about media misconduct started to shift into something far more complicated, a case about credibility. Because in high-profile legal battles, perception matters just as much as evidence, and this could change everything. But the biggest shock was still yet to come. As the courtroom discussions intensified, more details began to emerge, and with each new piece of information, the situation grew more explosive. According to reports circulating around the proceedings, the messages between Prince Harry and Charlotte Griffiths weren't just casual exchanges, they were strategic, and that's where the tension escalated dramatically. Because if these communications suggested cooperation, or even selective sharing of information, it could directly challenge Harry's long-standing portrayal of himself as a victim of media intrusion. But what happened next shocked everyone. Insiders began hinting that the tone of the messages painted a more nuanced picture, not necessarily one of contradiction, but certainly one of complexity. In other words, this wasn't black and white, it was grey, and that grey area is where the real story begins. Some observers argued that engaging with journalists doesn't automatically undermine Harry's claims. After all, controlled communication is very different from unlawful intrusion. But others saw it differently. They questioned whether these interactions blurred the lines between victim and participant. And in a legal setting, that distinction can be critical, because once credibility is questioned, everything else becomes harder to defend. However, behind the scenes, something even more significant was unfolding. The media itself began reacting, headlines started shifting, commentary became sharper, and suddenly the narrative surrounding Harry wasn't just about his legal fight, it was about his consistency. Was he saying one thing publicly while doing another privately? That question alone was enough to fuel intense debate. But then came another twist. Sources suggested that the timing of the leak or the revelation of these messages was no coincidence. Some speculated it could be a strategic move within the legal battle itself. Others believed it was part of a broader effort to reshape public perception. Either way, the impact was immediate. Public opinion began to shift. Supporters of Harry defended him, arguing that selective leaks can distort context. Critics, however, saw it as confirmation of long-held suspicions, and that's when things took an even darker turn. Because beyond the courtroom, this situation started to ripple outward, affecting not just Harry's legal case, but his overall image. And in the world of the royal family, image is everything, especially for someone who has built a post-royal identity around transparency and truth. But now that identity was being questioned, and this is where the pressure reached its peak, because no matter how the legal arguments unfold, the court of public opinion is already delivering its verdict, and it's far less predictable. As the dust begins to settle, the consequences of this revelation are becoming impossible to ignore. For Prince Harry, this isn't just another headline. It's a moment that could redefine his entire narrative. Because for years, Harry has positioned himself as someone challenging the system, exposing its flaws, confronting its power structures, and demanding accountability. But now, that position is under scrutiny, and that's where the real fallout begins. Public reaction has been deeply divided. Some continue to stand firmly behind Harry, arguing that his broader message about media ethics remains valid, regardless of individual interactions. Others, however, see this as a turning point, a moment where the gap between message and method becomes too significant to ignore. But what happens next could be even more important, because this situation doesn't exist in isolation. It connects to everything. His past interviews, his public statements, even his relationship with the royal family itself. And speaking of the royal family, while there has been no official response, insiders suggest that developments like this only deepen existing tensions, because every new controversy adds another layer to an already complex dynamic, and that's when things take a more personal turn. Reputation, once questioned, is difficult to rebuild, especially under the constant spotlight that follows Harry. Every statement, every appearance, every legal move now carries additional weight, because the audience is watching more closely than ever, and the stakes have never been higher. However, behind the headlines, one truth remains. This story is far from over. Legal proceedings will continue, more details may emerge, and the narrative could shift again, just as quickly as it did this time. But for now, one thing is certain. The courtroom didn't just reveal messages, it revealed a moment of vulnerability, a moment where public image and private reality collided. And in that collision, a new chapter began, one that may ultimately define not just this case, but the legacy of Prince Harry himself.